book started 8 years ago. I was a freshman in college. I was 18 years old, and I was spending every day on my dorm room bed looking up at the ceiling. And I was going through the what do I want to do with my life crisis. And to understand why I was going through it, you have to understand that I'm the son of immigrants in America. I was born in the United States, and my family's dream was for me to be a doctor. That to them meant a successful and safe life. And when I got to college, it was the first time I ever wondered, maybe I'm not on my path. Maybe I'm on a path somebody placed me on and I'm just rolling down. So now not only did I not know what I wanted to do with my life, I had no idea how the people who I looked up to, how they did it. How did Bill Gates sell his first piece of software out of his dorm room when nobody knew his name? Or how did Steven Spielberg become the youngest director in Hollywood history without a single hit under his belt? This is what they don't teach you in school. So I dreamed of writing the book that I was dreaming of reading. And that's The Third Door. When I started writing The Third Door, I was 18 years old. I had no credibility. No one knew my name. So to my surprise, it was a lot harder than I thought. The journey was full of rejection and people, slamming the door in my face. And what I've learned, though, is that I started out sort of being an amateur, not knowing how the world works. And while there's a lot of downsides to being young and fresh and naive, there's also an advantage. And the advantage is that you view the world through the lens of possibility. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that you can do. After 7 years of interviewing the world's most successful people, from Bill Gates to Jane Goodall to Steve Wozniak to Larry King, I realized they all treat life and business and success the exact same way. And the analogy that came to me is that it's sort of like getting into a nightclub. There's always 3 ways in. So there's the first door, the main entrance, where the line curves around the block, where 99% of people wait around hoping to get in. That's the first door. And then there's the second door, the VIP entrance, where the billionaires and celebrities go through. And school and society have this way of making us feel like those are the only 2 ways in. You either wait your turn or you're born into it. But what I learned is that there's always the third door, where you jump out of line, run down the alley, bang on the door 100 times, crack open the window, go through the kitchen. There's always a way in. And it doesn't matter if that's how Bill Gates sold his first piece of software or how Lady Gaga got her first record deal. They all took the third door. What I've learned about the third door is that in many ways, people in other countries sometimes use it even more than in America, because the third door isn't the comfortable door or the natural door. It's the door of necessity, where you have something that you need to get and you have obstacles in your way, and the question is, how are you going to go do it? So even if you look back 100 years ago, the way our grandparents lived their lives were all through the third door. They didn't have the first door back then. You couldn't just, wait in line with your resume. You had to, go down the alleyways and go into the markets and try to make it happen yourself. And what I've realized is that the most successful people today still have that mindset of doing whatever it takes to make it possible. With the future of the third door, what I've realized is that the book was just the first way to share this mission. And now that the book is out, I've realized that when I started writing The Third Door in the beginning, my big dream was to get all the best knowledge and wisdom in the world and to pack it into one book. And, in some ways, I was able to do that. In the book is Bill Gates' negotiating secrets. In the book is Tim Ferriss's cold email template. But only now that the book is finished can I see that that was never the point of the book. The soul of The Third Door is really about possibility. And there's this one story that I read a long time ago during my research. And it was about a teacher who was teaching a class of students where it was a neighborhood where there was, no money, a lot of poverty. And the teacher wanted to inspire the kids. They were maybe 8 years old. And she said, today we're all going to draw pictures of our biggest dream in life. What we want to be when we grow up. So she passes out the paper and the crayons to all the kids. And they all start coloring, except for one boy sitting in the back of the class. And his face is blank. And the teacher was looking at him, and maybe 20 minutes later, his eyes light up and he starts coloring a picture. At the end of the day, the kids go home and the teacher gets all the papers, and she's looking through them. And she sees that young boy drew a picture of a pizza delivery man. And the teacher was very concerned, so she called the mother that night. And the mother said that she wasn't surprised. The mother said that the only male figure in his life who's not on drugs or in jail is his uncle who delivers pizza. And what I learned from that story is that young people will always reach for the highest branch they believe is possible. They will always reach for the highest branch they believe is possible. So it's our job, whether it's society, schools, or families, to illuminate more branches. And that's my mission moving forward. So, when I started with the third door, I was a college student with no contacts. So the way I really got my first interviews and my first mentors was through cold emailing. With no contact, finding these people's email addresses online and just sending them messages. And I made a lot of mistakes. Everyone talks about how persistence is the key to success, but they never talk about the dangers of over-persistence. When you knock on the door so many times, they want to call the police on you. And what I learned is that there's a fine line between being persistent and thoughtful and being over-persistent and annoying. And what I've learned is you have to put yourself in their shoes. If you write one thoughtful email to someone, they might like it. Maybe you can follow up a second time, maybe a third time. But after that, if they're not interested in you, move on. And the key is to have a pipeline. To have 30 or 40 or 50 people that you're sending messages to, because you don't know who's going to say yes. So you want to increase your odds by making sure you have some quantity to that pipeline. Yeah, so one of the things that I learned in the beginning of the third door is the secret cold email template from a man named Tim Ferriss, who's the best-selling author of the book, The 4-Hour Workweek. And something I learned from Tim Ferriss is that this is how the cold email template works. So let's say you're emailing the CEO of a big company, and this is what you write. Dear so-and-so, I know you're very busy and you get a lot of emails, so this will only take 60 seconds to read. Boom, next paragraph. Next paragraph is where you put 1 to 2 sentences maximum of who you are and what context is relevant to that person. So you're not writing your life story. You're just putting 1 to 2 sentences showing your credibility. The next paragraph is where you put 1 to 2 sentences of your very specific question for that person. And finally, the final paragraph is the most important. You say, I totally understand if you're too busy to reply. Even a 1 or 2 line response will completely make my day. All the best, Alex. And that has worked to get me interviews, that has worked to get me mentors, and hundreds, if not thousands of readers have already used this cold email template, and it's worked incredibly well for them. One of the biggest commonalities of all the successful people I interviewed is I thought in the beginning they were all fearless. I imagined, how else would Bill Gates or Elon Musk achieved what they achieved if they weren't fearless? But what I realized is that they all were scared. And not only were they scared, they were terrified the whole way through. And that didn't make any sense to me. So what I realized during my interviews is not only were they not fearless, it was actually courage that they achieved. And while, the words sound similar, the difference is critical. Fearlessness is jumping off of a cliff and not thinking about it. That's crazy. But courage is acknowledging your fear, analyzing the consequences, and then deciding you care so much about it, you're still going to take one thoughtful step forward anyways. And that's one of the biggest commonalities I saw across the board. One of the great things about going on the journey of the third door is I learned how to interview. And, one of the best interviewers on earth, Larry King, taught me the secret to interviewing. And he said, you want to know the secret? Do you want to know the secret? The secret is, there is no secret. Just be yourself. And what he went on to explain to me is that what makes the best interview is when you're comfortable in your seat. Because when you're comfortable, your guest is comfortable. And that's what makes for the best interview. Well, the first thing I'll say is if you're just starting out, and it doesn't matter what age you are, it's really about the stage you're in. And if you're lucky enough to have access to the internet, you can cold email, you can send messages on WeChat, that's the first thing. The second thing though is when I was 18, and I had no access to anyone, I would go to events. I would go to book signings of authors. I would go to, public events where there would be different speakers, and I would go up to them. And, at the end, I would sort of stand in the back, and then I'd come up to them at the end and tell them about my dream. And not everyone was helpful, but some said yes. That's all that you need. And for me, the network resources has grown a lot by writing the book. That wasn't the reason why I wrote the book, but I realized in life, it's all about the relationships and the people in your life. And some of my best friends I met along the way of writing The Third Door. To me, the definition of success has changed over this 7-year journey for me. When I started, I had a very Western definition of, the more money you have, the more power you have, that to me was success. And, you look at the magazine covers, you look at, who's on television, and that's what they do. They put the people with the most money and the most power on the covers of the magazines. But it wasn't until I went on this journey of the third door that I realized success is much more about knowing what you want and achieving it in a way you like. So, there's two parts. It's knowing exactly what you care about and doing it in a way that makes you happy. And a great example is, let's say you want to be a great father, but you're spending 20 hours a day at work and you never see your kids. Even if you get promotions and you become the CEO of your company, you're not very successful if your goal is to be at home with your children. And vice versa is true too. I think a lot of people like to try to say, what's the most important ingredient to success? Is it the network resources? Is it the hard work? Is it luck? Is it intelligence? People love to debate this. But the reality is that it's all of them. And, no one likes that answer because people want to know that one secret. But the truth is, if you look back in history, if you look at today, it's all of them. And the question is, how do you really make sure that you bring your best self in? So, for me, maybe network resources might be a big advantage. For some people, it might be, for Lucci, it's intelligence and luck. Everyone has their own emphasis on the different ingredients, but the reality is you need all of them. Yeah, I would say, again, the whole point of the third door is that the third door is not a recipe. It's a mindset. It's a way of looking at your problems. It's a way of thinking that no matter what obstacles are in front of me, at the end of the day, there's always a way. Do I have any regrets? On the one hand, one of the biggest lessons that I learned is that your mistakes are your biggest gift. And I made a lot of mistakes while writing The Third Door. With Mark Zuckerberg, I missed my meeting with him and they almost called the police on me. With Warren Buffett, I was extremely over persistent and I messed that up. So there was a lot of mistakes on my way to make this book a reality. But the truth is, all those mistakes taught me my biggest lessons. So I'm incredibly grateful for the whole journey. If I could go back to my 18-year-old self, the biggest advice I would give him is to relax. I was so tightly wound up, so focused to the point where sometimes the biggest mistakes I made was because I was so desperate to succeed. And sometimes the best thing you can do is to relax and remind yourself everything's going to be okay. And then you can be a little bit more thoughtful about how you make your decisions. It took a long time to finish this book. I thought it would only take me like 3 months, but I was very young and very naive, and I didn't know that this was a very hard thing to do. I didn't know how hard it was to sit down with Bill Gates or sit down with Lucci. I thought it was, very simple. And it took 7 years because it took 3 to 4 years to get all the interviews. And then it took another 3 years to write it all into a book. That's not just a how-to book, but really an adventure story. And to me, it was the most fulfilling decision of my life because I poured my heart into this book, and to hear from different readers around the world that it's changing their life is the biggest gift I could get. I started this book out of curiosity and really out of need. I grew up with an immigrant family in America where my family, their only advice for me was really just be a doctor and just focus on your studies. And when I decided that maybe I don't want to be a doctor, I had this big question of, okay, I don't know what to do and I don't know how to do it. So to me, I wanted answers. And I remember going to the library and reading every business book that I could, reading every self-help book that I could. And what I wanted was a book that focused on when people were just starting out, when nobody would take their calls, nobody would take their meetings, how did they find a way to break through? And eventually, I was left empty-handed. And that's when my naive 18-year-old thinking kicked in, and I thought, well, if no one's written the book I'm dreaming of reading, why not write it myself? And that's what became The Third Door. Although The Third Door has my journey in it, it's definitely not my autobiography. But if there's one thing I've learned, especially this past year, is I still have a lot to learn too. The whole point of The Third Door is to not only help people achieve their dreams, but also to show them what's possible. And, Lucci is a great example of a story. He grew up in a village outside of Shanghai, with no running water and no electricity. People were, so poor that they walked around with deformities from malnutrition. And he was very smart and very hardworking, and, ended up at Fudan University. And at the time, though, the most money he was making was about $7 a month. Fast forward 20 years later, and he's a president at Microsoft. And then, CEO of Baidu, and then CEO of Y Combinator China. And he's just one of the many stories that I came across the past 7 years that completely changed what I believed is possible. What I've learned about college is it is an amazing way for so many people to achieve their dreams and move up in life. At the same time, not everything in life has to be one size fits everyone. For me, I went to college for 2 years, and then The Third Door took off, and I, worked full time on The Third Door. For other people, maybe they have a startup where, they start working on it, and then after 3 years they leave. For some people, Lu Chi is a great example. He went to undergrad, got his master's, and got his PhD. So for everyone, it's different. And the key is to find out what you want to achieve and what's the best way to make that happen. And sometimes getting your PhD is the best way to make it happen, and sometimes dropping out of undergrad is the best way to make it happen. So it's hard, but you actually have to think for yourself and not just do what everyone else is doing. What I've learned when it comes to how you talk to yourself and how you think about yourself, the best thing is to build up your self-confidence. And what I've learned is that can work in all areas of your life. So let's say you want to be, more successful in your career, but you have trouble with your self-confidence there. A good, easy trick is to start building your self-confidence maybe in other parts of your life. Maybe it's exercising, maybe it's eating healthy, maybe it's reading more books. And what happens is every time you overcome a challenge, you become a little bit more confident in your abilities. And what happens is that it's almost like going to the gym and lifting weights. First you lift 5 pounds, and then 10 pounds, and then 15, and then 20, and then in 5 years you're lifting 100 pounds, and everybody goes, "How did you do it?" And the answer is little by little with time. The biggest lesson that I learned over the past 7 years of interviewing the world's most successful people is that life likes you to think that there's only one way to go about it. School, society wants you to think you just stand in line holding your resume, hoping, the bouncer lets you in. What I've realized is that the hardest part of achieving a dream isn't, running down the alley and making it happen yourself. The hardest part of achieving a dream is leaving the line for the first door, because that's where your family expects you to be. That's where your university expects you to be. That's where all your friends are. The hard part of achieving a dream is having that courage to go against what everyone else is doing and to go after what you want.